So in this video, we're going to talk about two concepts that are kind of related. They say, I say moves and the doubting and believing game. And both of them contribute to both critical thinking and critical reading. They say, I say moves are about how you present information in relationship to what other people are saying. And the doubting and believing game is how you read information in a way to understand better what you're looking at and how you should respond to that from your own critical thinking. So you remember we talked briefly last week about the ways to respond. We said you can say yes and, no because, or yes but, or maybe that's maybe. Um, so in this video, we're talking about how we can clarify when we use one of those response moves that we're responding to something and that other view isn't our viewpoint, but rather this one that we're responding with is. So it's very important to be able to clarify that. So for instance, have you ever read a really difficult passage and you thought you got it? And then you got to class discussion or you compared your notes with your friend or whatever, and you found out that it meant exactly the opposite of what you thought. This is a really common experience. And almost every time that this happens, it's a failure to read the they say moves correctly. That is, you might have missed where the author was positioning their viewpoint against an opposite viewpoint. And don't worry, we all make this mistake at some point. Um, and even the most experienced readers will sometimes make this mistake because it can be easy to miss those they say moves if we're not paying attention or if we're not practiced at it. So when you make a they say move, it's very important that you somehow, in a genre appropriate way, mark that that belongs to someone else. So this may be a full MLA citation, but not every rhetorical situation calls for that. There's three kinds of referencing other people. There's quotations, paraphrase, and summary. A quotation is direct words, should always be in quotation marks, even if you're on Twitter, or on social media, quotation mark is sometimes indicated as an embedded tweet or something like that. But the point is, it's always somehow marked with a visual marker, and this helps avoid confusion. And it should generally, wherever possible, be accompanied by some kind of an attribution. The best, simplest attribution will do according to so and so. That lets us know. Quotes should be used fairly sparingly, actually. You don't get extra points just because you quoted a whole lot of people. That's not the way that works. Quotes should be used when you need the exact phrase for effect or precision. So in the humanities, since we're often analyzing the way something is said, we quote a lot. But in the sciences, quotations may be very rare because what's important is how the information was gathered and what the data points to, not how it was said. So quotes are used sparingly, but you'll find them more frequently in certain situations. Paraphrase is restating what was said with your own words, and you can still use according to so-and-so or some other template like that to indicate who you're getting this information from. But paraphrase is useful when, for instance, you think your audience might be confused or bored or otherwise unable to read the original phrasing, or the original phrasing doesn't really fit the style you're going to and it would be too jarring. Or maybe, maybe the original was too long, or you're getting something out of multiple sentences that you need to fit into just a little space. Whatever it is, it's very common. I find APA papers are just riddled with paraphrase, and you can tell because there's citations everywhere but no quotation marks. But that's, as I said, because in the sciences, you often need the information but not the exact words. And then finally, there's summary, which is conveying the big general point of a passage or text briefly. And it's useful when the thing you want to reference is long, when you want to reference many things at once. And it should also still be attributed, but maybe not with the according to so and so. It might be something more general. Um, However, you still need to somehow indicate that it's something else. Um, in academic writing, we prefer over indication. So even with the summary, you can still just use according to or so and so says. Just the simplest ones are best because they're most familiar, they're most obvious. Don't worry about finding synonyms for says. Um, it's kind of as invisible as a period, honestly. Um, but whatever your situation, you want to make sure that your reader always knows where things are coming from because you want to avoid that case of your reader thinking you meant something that you didn't mean, but you were actually just setting up your argument with. You want to avoid your reader being in that position of believing that you said the opposite of what you actually said. So it's very important to use those they say moves. Um, I say moves are, of course, the opposite. That's how you indicate to your reader, this is my idea. Listen to me. Um, so the default assumption for readers is anything that you are saying is your idea unless otherwise specified. However, when you're coming out of they say moves, especially, it can be good to specify that you're returning to your opinion as a transitionary device so that your reader knows, okay, this is what they want me to hear. The rest was background. This is what's important. So let me give you an example of how you can blend they say and I say moves together. Um, Although it is often said that practice makes perfect, this is a they say move, although it is often said, my band director once told me instead that perfect practice makes perfect. Notice the use of a quotation mark there, even though you can't actually see the quotation. But notice that there we've used that they say move. So we've got many people say this, one person said this, and then to that end, I am proposing that we need to teach students how to practice rather than simply telling them to keep trying. Thus, in writing courses, we need a lot of focus on process and should provide revision opportunities, blah, blah, blah. Notice the I say move. To that end, I am proposing that. So you're going to be like, wait, I thought we weren't allowed to use first person. That depends. In the humanities, generally, yeah, we are. In the sciences, not so much. But in the sciences, this would be done simply like the study at hand suggests, or the present study. So there would be a third person move that takes that place, but nevertheless orients the reader and says, this is where we're going here. In your notes, you want to make sure you take account for they say and I say moves. Highlight your own ideas in a different color if that's what you have to do. Always put a page number if you quote or paraphrase. Whatever you do, make sure it's consistent and that you know where you're going to find this stuff. And then finally, there's the critical reading, because we cannot accurately summarize, quote, paraphrase someone else without first having read them well. And this week, you're going to be mostly doing your reading because you're going to be looking for your sources for your bibliography. So the doubting and believing game is named for a strategy that you can use to practice critical reading. In this technique, you're going to have to read more than once. Very practiced readers can sometimes compress multiple passes into one by having multiple ideas in their head at the same time, but this is kind of difficult, and you'll need to practice separating them at first. On the first pass, you play the believing game. In this one, you read generously. That is, you try to believe what the author is saying. You want to give them the benefit of the doubt where there seems to be something shaky, and you want to try to see where the strengths of their argument are. Even if you disagree with that argument wholeheartedly, you want to look for how did they make this logic work. Then on later passes, you play the doubting game. So even if you agree with them wholeheartedly, now you're looking for, but are there places where their logic is weak? Are there places where they ignore important information? Are there places where they dismiss a legitimate interpretation of that information? And then once you've done both, believing and doubting, you can compare and evaluate your experience with both sets of reading mindsets. And that's where the critical reading happens. That's where you can actually say, well, the argument's strong, but it's based on this false premise. Or, the argument is really weak, even though I agree with them. How? Why? Why is it that way? This takes a lot of practice, so it's okay if you find this really difficult at the beginning, but it's a really good way to get into the practice of reading to understand, but also to build more knowledge on top of that. So as you go through looking for sources for your bibliography, play the believing game, play the doubting game, read generously and then read skeptically, and take very careful notes, as I said in the first video, and just get into the habit of keeping good records and organizing those records so that you can use them later.